So let me share with you what God's been blessing me with recently from what I've been studying in His Word. So 1 John 5:21 says, "Little children, guard yourself from idols." And it's an interesting book. 1 John talks about the love of God, forgiveness, confessing our sins. Just a great book, and it goes into all of this deep theology. And you would think, okay, he wrestles through this deep theology, and at the end of it all, comes down to saying, the last verse, guard yourself from idols, something that you would think is very fundamental to all of us. Now, the New Living Translation, I don't have it here, but it says something like, guard yourself from anything that would take God's place in your heart. Because that's really what an idol is to us today. Right? An idol, I mean, we're not in danger of worshiping a wooden statue or things like that. But for us, those idols are those things in our daily lives which are going to steal God's place in our hearts. Things, it could be your bank account, your job, your pursuit of career, school, whatever it may be. It could be even something good like your wife, an earthly love for your wife, your children, your ministry. Your ministry could become an idol in your life. You could be serving God and you could just be worshiping that service and completely lose track of worshiping God in your heart. So that's been such a challenge for me. I want to challenge you guys as well to remind yourselves of what the true priority in your lives are. Are you too busy pursuing that profession, that job, that family life, that ministry even, that it's stealing away from? We know God is a jealous God. He wants 100% of our worship, our complete attention on Him. Deuteronomy 6 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, might. Jesus quoted that as well. And Jesus was serious about that. It didn't mean, give Him 80% of your heart, or give Him 50%. And then the rest you can spare for your wife, your ministry, your family, your bank account. It meant 100%. Everything was God's due. Let Him direct you on how you want to use all of those, how He wants you to use all of those things. So in context of that, one of the things, a couple of examples from the Old Testament of people got it right and people got it wrong. So we know that God gave Solomon a choice in 1 Kings 6 to ask anything, and it's a great story. God says, "Ask anything of me, and I'll give it to you." And we know that Solomon asked for wisdom. 1 Kings, I believe it's 1 Kings 4. Sorry, 1 Kings 3, verse 5 says, ask what you wish me to give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great loving kindness to your servant David, my father, according as you walk before you in truth and righteousness. And he goes on to say, no, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of father. I do not know how to go out or come in. So it goes on to verse 9, so give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people. And, God was pleased with this answer. We think this was a great answer. But yet, if you really think about it, it wasn't the best thing that Solomon could have asked for. You contrast that with what his father asked for in Psalm 27:4, which says, one thing I ask of the Lord. It's the one thing he asks of the Lord. Let me pull up the verse so I can read it exactly as it is. Psalm 27:4. One thing I have asked from the Lord, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold His beauty, to meditate in His temple. And that was the difference between David and Solomon. The one thing that they both were allowed to ask for one thing from God, and David asked that he may just have the Lord Himself, to dwell and meditate in His temple, to just be completely filled with the Lord Himself, and that was it. When Solomon was given that option, he asked for a good thing, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing. He asked for wisdom, and as we know the story of Solomon, how he later, had many wives, went to worshiping the idols of his wives, and finally went astray. But even before those idols entered into Solomon's life, there's an interesting thing that happened. We go back to 1 Kings and chapter 6. In the last verse, it says, interesting thing to put in perspective. We know that Solomon did a great thing building the temple of the Lord. But what many people don't realize is the dream for building the house of God was actually David's. David wanted to build that house. David gathered all of the materials to build that house of the Lord. It was his vision. Solomon just executed on it because the Lord had so planned that David would not do that and his son would do that. And it says in verse 38, the last verse of 1 Kings 6, the last part says, he spent 7 years building this temple of the Lord. That's a great amount of time to be spending your time building the house of God, and we look at that as a great thing. But here's the contrast. Go to the very next verse, which is in the next chapter, 1 Kings 7:1. Now Solomon was building his own palace for 13 years. He spent almost twice as much time building a palace to himself. This is way before he fell into idolatry. And this is, I think, the key to how he started going down the wrong path. His desire was right in the beginning, building the house of God. And then somewhere along when he started gathering this wealth and this wisdom that God had given him, he probably got proud about it, and his priorities got reset. And he started pursuing 13 years of worth of building that house. Twice as much time building something for himself than he spent building the temple of the Lord. Now we remember Solomon for building the temple of God. But I want you to remember Solomon for spending twice as much time building his own palace. And use that as a warning to yourself. Are we going to live on this earth spending twice as much time pursuing our palaces, whatever? It may not be physical palaces, it could be your physical house or whatever, but it could be just that pursuit of that idol in your life, that thing that consumes your attention, that thing when you go to sleep at night, that's what you dream about, that's what's in the back of your mind, that's what's on your pillow when you're lying down at night, that's what you wake up thinking about, that's what's consuming. If it's not God right now, there's something wrong. We need to check ourselves and say, God, I want to love you with all my heart, I want you to consume all of my heart, I want you to worship, I want to worship you completely. I want you to purify me in your fire to a point where I have nothing, no desire in me, no desire for anything else in this world. Even my own self-righteousness will not be an idol in my life. Even the righteousness that you have given me will not be an idol in my life. Even if you have given me an Isaac, a promised son, like Isaac was promised to Abraham, I'm going to be willing to give that up on the altar because that's not mine, that's yours. And to have that priority, that's really what I want to challenge you guys with. And then lastly, I'll end with, it's interesting, I would talk about 1 Kings. So I've been studying the book of Kings, the kings of Israel and Judah, and how they split up. And it's interesting how Solomon was the start of them going astray and worshiping idols, and it just got worse from that. You go through Jeroboam on one side, Rehoboam on the other side. You go through all the kings of Israel and Judah, and there's just like few and far between people who actually served the Lord. And even when they did not like completely destroy all the idolatry among them. They went to a period where they were just so far out from God, just seeking out the idols, until the first man who came along who actually passed the Asa and Jehoshaphat and all of those guys who were good, but even they did not strip out all the idols in the land, was a man named Hezekiah, a king named Hezekiah. And he did something amazing. If you read about it in 2 Chronicles, I'm not going to read through it, but if you have free time, look through the history of the kings, and you get to 2 Chronicles 30 and 31. And he basically organized what I believe is the first revival of any kind in the history of the world, in at least in biblical times. And he basically took the land of Israel and Judah, which were completely separated at that time since Solomon's death, sent invitations to the king of Judah and the leaders there and said, let's get together, let's celebrate the Passover. We've forgotten our roots. Let's get together and celebrate the Passover feast together. Let's get this revival together. And now, today's revivals that we have, that we see around us, especially in Pentecostal charismatic movements around us, can sometimes get so caught up with pursuing the gifts of the Spirit, pursuing an emotional manifestation, an emotional reaction, that we completely miss the essence of what the revival is all about. And if you go to what Hezekiah was trying to achieve in these chapters, in chapter 30 and 31, it was to get back to the Lord. It was to get back with a state of repentance. It says at some point, the priests were ashamed of themselves, and they burnt offerings and peace offerings to minister to God, it says in 2 Chronicles 31. And they went through, if you read through that, 2 Chronicles 31:1, they went through destroying all the idols in the land, destroying all the Asherah poles, just cutting down the Asherah and pulling down the high places and the altars throughout all Judah and Benjamin. And it goes on to say later on, they took it out to this valley of Kidron and just burnt it up over there. And that to me is the true revival we need to seek. It's not one that's just seeking these, gifts of the Spirit, these manifestations of supernatural, spectacular things. Is that bringing past Sunday morning, after we've prophesied and after we've spoken in tongues and all that, when Monday morning comes around, do we have a repentant heart? Is our heart tuned to God? Are we still stuck doing those, falling into the same sins, pursuing the same idols? Or do we have that repentant heart where we're saying, Lord, I'm going to permanently burn these idols in my life. I don't want them back. That's what true revival is about. I want to challenge you guys to seek after that with all your heart. Seek for the Lord to completely dominate and completely just fill your heart so there's no room for anything else.